The thunder of hooves across the dusty plain carried a warning as urgent as the storm brewing on the horizon. Olivia Newcomb saw him coming long before he reached her, a lone rider cutting through the golden New Mexico sunset, his silhouette growing larger against the vast emptiness surrounding truth or consequences. She gripped the porch railing of her small homestead, knuckles white, knowing strangers only brought trouble to women living alone in 1878. Yancy Evans pulled his chestnut stallion to a stop, dust settling around his worn boots as he dismounted. His eyes, blue as the summer sky above the mesas, took in the modest cabin, the small garden struggling against the arid climate, and finally, the woman watching him with wary determination. "Madam," he said, removing his hat and revealing sandy hair bleached lighter by the sun. "Apologies for the intrusion. My horse is favoring his left front hoof and I spotted your place. Might I trouble you for some water and a look at his shoe?" Olivia hesitated. At 26, she'd learned caution the hard way. "Water troughs around back," she answered, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone unaccustomed to conversation. "I'll fetch a lantern. Sun's nearly gone." Yancy nodded his thanks, leading his horse around the small cabin. Olivia watched his retreating back, broad shoulders beneath a dust-coated shirt, gun belt worn but well-tended, the practiced ease of his movements marking him as a man comfortable with the harsh realities of frontier life. When she joined him with the lantern, he was already crouched beside his horse, running capable hands along the animal's leg. "Picked up a stone," Yancy explained, not looking up. "Nothing serious, but I'd hate to lame him with another 10 miles to go." 10 miles would put you in town," Olivia said, holding the lantern higher. "You heading to truth or consequences?" "Yes, madam, got business with the marshal there." He worked the stone free with a small knife, then straightened. In the lantern light, she saw features carved by weather and hard living, but kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "What business?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Yancy gave a tired smile. "Tracking someone, I'm a bounty hunter." The words struck her like a physical blow. Olivia stepped back, light swinging wildly in her hand. "You should go." "Madam," confusion crossed his face. "Now that your horse is fine, you should leave." He studied her, perception sharpening his gaze. "Have I done something to offend?" "No, but bounty hunters bring nothing but pain." Her voice had gone cold. "Water's there if you need it. Good evening, Mr. Evans, Yancy Evans." He didn't move toward the water. "And you are," she hesitated. "Olivia Newcomb." "Miss Newcomb, I understand your wariness, but night's falling and those clouds promise rain. I'd be grateful to sleep in your barn if you're willing. I'll be gone at first light." Olivia glanced at the horizon where dark clouds were gathering. The thought of sending anyone into that storm twisted in her chest, warring with her instinct for self-preservation. "The barn," she agreed finally, "and you leave at dawn." Relief crossed his face. "Much obliged. Don't make me regret it, Mr. Evans." As she walked back to the house, thunder rolled in the distance, a low warning like the beating of drums. The storm broke just after midnight, rain hammering against the roof of Olivia's cabin with the ferocity of gunfire. She sat upright in bed, heart racing, hand instinctively reaching for the rifle propped against her nightstand. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed seconds later by a crash of thunder that shook the walls. In that moment, she thought of the stranger in her barn. Whatever his business, he at least had shelter from this fury. She sank back against her pillow, listening to the storm's rage, memories stirring like dust devils in her mind. 5 years had passed since she'd fled east, since she'd reinvented herself in this remote corner of the territory. 5 years of solitude, of building walls higher than any fortress, of looking over her shoulder with each passing stranger. Morning came with the clear, washed brilliance that follows desert storms. Olivia dressed quickly, pushing through her door to survey the damage. The yard had transformed into a network of shallow streams and puddles. Her garden looked bedraggled but intact. She turned toward the barn, expecting to see Yancy Evans preparing to depart. The barn door stood ajar, but there was no sign of him or his horse. Relief and an odd disappointment mingled in her chest. She crossed to the structure, mud sucking at her boots. "Mr. Evans," she called, peering inside. "Here." His voice came from the corner where he knelt beside a heifer, hands moving with practiced ease over the animal's swollen belly. "Your cow's in labor. Found her struggling when I woke." Olivia hurried forward, alarm replacing all other emotions. Daisy wasn't due for weeks yet. Storm might have stressed her. He glanced up, eyes serious. "She's having trouble." Together they worked over the next hour, Yancy's calm direction guiding Olivia as they helped the heifer deliver a calf that came breech. When the wet, trembling creature finally lay in the straw, Daisy licking it clean, Olivia sat back on her heels, exhaustion and relief washing through her. "Thank you," she said simply. "You saved them both." Yancy shrugged, wiping his hands on a rag. "Grew up on a cattle ranch in Texas, seen my share of difficult births." He looked at her with new respect. "You handled yourself well." "Necessity is an effective teacher," Olivia replied, rising to her feet. She hesitated, then added, "I've got coffee brewing in the house if you'd care for some before you ride out." The offer surprised them both. Yancy's eyebrows lifted, but he nodded. "Appreciate it." In her kitchen, Olivia poured thick black coffee into 2 chipped mugs, hyper-aware of the man sitting at her small table, the first person she'd invited inside in over a year. Sunlight slanted through the windows, catching dust motes and highlighting the careful neatness of her home. Herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, shelves of preserved vegetables, a small collection of books. "You run this place alone?" Yancy asked, cradling his mug. "Yes," Olivia answered shortly, unwilling to elaborate. "That's impressive." His tone held genuine admiration. "Most men I know couldn't manage it." She permitted herself a small smile. "Most men haven't had to." "Fair point." He sipped his coffee, eyes traveling over the cabin's interior. They paused on the rifle mounted beside the door, well-oiled and positioned for easy access. "You expecting trouble, Miss Newcomb?" "In my experience, Mr. Evans, trouble rarely announces itself in advance." She met his gaze steadily. "Who are you hunting?" The directness of her question didn't appear to surprise him. "A man named Richard Blackwell. Killed 2 people during a bank robbery in Santa Fe. Word is he's hiding in truth or consequences." Olivia kept her expression neutral, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "You're a long way from Santa Fe. Been tracking him for 3 weeks, Yancy replied, setting down his mug. "Man's crafty, I'll give him that. And when you find him, what then? Bring him in to face justice." Something in his tone made Olivia look up sharply. Yancy Evans didn't have the hard eyes of the bounty hunters she'd encountered before, men who cared only for the reward, who would bring in their quarry dead or alive with equal indifference. "You prefer them alive," she observed. "Every man deserves his day in court." He held her gaze. "Even the worst ones?" Olivia turned away, busying herself at the stove. "An unusual philosophy for your profession." "I hunt men who have broken the law, Miss Newcomb. That doesn't give me the right to be judge and executioner." She looked back at him, studying his face for deception and finding none. "You're an unusual bounty hunter, Mr. Evans. Just a man trying to do right in a world that makes it difficult." He finished his coffee and stood. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough. Thank you for the shelter and the coffee." Olivia walked him to the door, watching as he checked his saddle and prepared to mount. The storm had left the world glistening, desert flowers already lifting their heads to the sun, the air fresh and clean. "Mr. Evans," she called as he swung into the saddle. He looked down, waiting. "If you're still in town tomorrow, I'll be bringing eggs and butter to Holcomb's general store. Perhaps I could buy you a meal in thanks for helping with Daisy." Surprise flickered across his features, followed by a smile that transformed his weathered face. "I'd be honored, Miss Newcomb." She watched him ride away, a solitary figure against the vast landscape, and wondered at her own impulsivity. 5 years of careful isolation, of guarding her secrets, and now she'd invited a bounty hunter to share a meal. The irony wasn't lost on her. With a sigh, Olivia turned back to her chores, trying to ignore the whisper of warning in her mind, a voice reminding her that connection, even momentary, could only lead to pain. Truth or consequences had grown since Olivia last visited 3 weeks prior. 2 new buildings stood on Main Street, and the constant hammering from the north end suggested more construction underway. The small frontier town was transforming, railroads pushing ever westward, bringing new settlers, new opportunities, and new dangers. She guided her wagon past the saloon, ignoring the curious glances from men lounging on the porch. Women traveling alone still drew attention, especially those who kept to themselves as she did. The general store stood at the center of town, its weathered facade a welcome sight. Mr. Holcomb greeted her with his usual warmth as she entered, bell jingling above the door. "Miss Newcomb, been wondering when you'd make it in. Storm give you much trouble out your way?" "Just some mud and a premature calf," she replied, setting her basket of eggs on the counter. "Nothing serious. Good to hear it. Got those seeds you asked about last time." He rummaged beneath the counter, producing a small paper packet. "Tomatoes that'll stand up to our heat, if you believe the drummer who sold them to me." Olivia smiled, pulling her list from her pocket. "I'll take them, along with the usual supplies." As Holcomb gathered her items, the store's bell chimed again. Olivia didn't need to turn to know who had entered. The sudden stillness in her spine told her enough. "Mr. Evans," Holcomb called cheerfully. "Back again so soon." "Forgot tobacco," Yancy replied, and Olivia heard his footsteps approaching. "Afternoon, Miss Newcomb." She turned, composing her features into polite acknowledgement. "Mr. Evans." He looked different in town, clean-shaven, hair damp from a recent bath, his clothes less trail-worn. The transformation suited him, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the clarity of his eyes. "Did your business with the marshal prove fruitful?" she asked, aware of Holcomb's interest in their conversation. A shadow crossed Yancy's face. "Not yet. My quarry's proving elusive." "Perhaps he's moved on," Olivia suggested, her voice carefully neutral. "Perhaps." Yancy studied her with an intensity that made her look away. "But something tells me he's close. Men like that leave ripples, even when they're trying to disappear." The words sent a chill through her. She busied herself examining a bolt of calico, fingers tracing the pattern without seeing it. "Does your offer of a meal still stand?" Yancy asked, his tone lightening. "Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house serves a decent stew, I'm told." Holcomb's eyebrows shot up, his hands pausing in their work. Olivia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It does," she confirmed, meeting Yancy's gaze with a challenge in her own. Let the gossips talk. She'd be gone from town in hours anyway. "Shall we say 5 o'clock? I'll meet you there." He tipped his hat, paid for his tobacco, and left, the bell announcing his departure. Holcomb cleared his throat. "Known Mr. Evans long, have you? He sheltered in my barn during the storm," Olivia replied evenly. "Helped deliver Daisy's calf." "The meal is payment for his assistance," Nothing more. Of course, Holcomb murmured, though his expression remained skeptical. Though I should mention, since you keep to yourself mostly, Evans has quite the reputation as a bounty hunter. They say he always gets his man. Olivia's hand tightened on her purse. Is that so? Been doing it for years, from what I hear. Started after the war. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. They say he's got an almost supernatural ability to track people, follows trails gone cold for months. Interesting, Olivia managed, her throat suddenly dry. I'll take those seeds now and the rest of my order if you please. I'd like to finish my errands before meeting Mr. Evans. Holcomb nodded, returning to his task. Olivia stared at the store's window, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight, her mind racing through options, consequences, possibilities. Perhaps it was time to move on again. She'd done it before, could do it again. The thought exhausted her. 5 years of running. 5 years of looking over her shoulder. How long could one person live that way? Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house stood 2 streets back from the main thoroughfare, its whitewashed walls and neat garden setting it apart from the more utilitarian buildings surrounding it. A former schoolteacher from Boston, Mrs. Whittaker had brought Eastern sensibilities to her establishment, insisting on cleanliness and decorum that made her dining room the most respectable place for a meal in truth or consequences. Olivia arrived precisely at 5, her wagon left at the livery stable, her best dress a simple blue calico with minimal embellishment brushed clean of dust. She found Yancy waiting on the porch, hat in hand, looking as uncomfortable in the civilized setting as she felt. "Miss Newcomb," he greeted her with a slight bow. "You look lovely." "Thank you," she replied, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Shall we go in?" The dining room held 4 tables, only one occupied by a traveling salesman who barely glanced up from his newspaper as they entered. Mrs. Whittaker herself showed them to a table by the window, her assessing gaze taking in Olivia's companion with undisguised interest. "Don't often see you in town for dinner, Miss Newcomb," she observed, pouring water into their glasses. "A special occasion," Olivia replied with a smile that didn't invite further questions. Once they were seated and Mrs. Whittaker had retreated to the kitchen, an awkward silence fell. Olivia found herself studying the tablecloth's pattern, suddenly unsure why she'd suggested this meal. What did she have to say to this man who hunted fugitives for a living? "I don't make you nervous, do I, Miss Newcomb?" Yancy asked, his voice gentle. Olivia looked up, startled by his perception. "Should you? I hope not." He smiled, the expression softening his features. "Despite my occupation, it's an unusual profession," she acknowledged. "How does one become a bounty hunter?" Yancy's eyes grew distant. "War ended. Came home to Texas to find my family's ranch burned, parents dead from fever. Had skills with tracking from my time as a scout and a need to earn a living." He shrugged. "Started with local sheriffs needing help, grew from there." "And do you enjoy it? Hunting people?" "Enjoy?" He considered the word as if it were foreign. "No, not enjoy. Find satisfaction in bringing criminals to justice, yes. Some of these men I track have destroyed lives, ruined families. There's meaning in stopping them from doing more harm." The conviction in his voice caught her off guard. "You believe in justice, then?" "I believe in the law, imperfect as it is." His gaze sharpened. "Don't you?" Before she could formulate a response, Mrs. Whittaker returned with bowls of fragrant stew, fresh bread, and a pot of coffee. They ate in silence for several minutes, the food providing a welcome distraction from the intensity of their conversation. "Your homestead," Yancy said eventually. "How long have you had it?" 3 years, Olivia answered, relieved at the change of subject. "Bought it from a widow returning east. The land isn't much, but it suits my needs." And before that, she stiffened slightly. I traveled, worked where I could. Unusual path for a woman alone, perhaps. Olivia met his gaze steadily. But necessity, as I mentioned before, is a powerful motivator. Yancy nodded, accepting her evasion. The calf looked strong when I left. Have you named it yet? The mundane question eased something in Olivia's chest. They spoke of cattle and crops, of the changing weather and the town's growth. Yancy described his travels across the territories, painting pictures of mountains and canyons she'd never seen. She found herself laughing at his description of an encounter with a particularly stubborn mule in Arizona, the sound strange to her own ears. As they finished their meal, Olivia realized with surprise that the sun was beginning to set. They had talked for nearly 2 hours, the conversation flowing more easily than any she'd had in years. I should be heading back, she said reluctantly. It's a long ride, and night comes quickly. I'll walk you to the livery, Yancy offered, placing coins on the table to cover their meal despite her protests. Outside, the evening had brought a cooler breeze, carrying the sense of sage and distant rain. They walked side by side, not touching, but close enough that Olivia was acutely aware of his presence. How long will you stay in Truth or Consequences? She asked as they approached the livery stable, until I find Blackwell or confirm he's moved on. Yancy glanced down at her. Could be days, could be weeks. And then, another wanted man, another town. His voice held resignation. It's the life I've chosen. A lonely one, Olivia observed softly. Yes. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Miss Newcomb, Olivia, I've enjoyed your company more than I can say. Would it be too forward to call on you again if my stay extends? The question hung between them in the gathering twilight. Olivia knew the sensible answer, the safe answer. Yet something in his eyes, earnestness perhaps, or a loneliness that mirrored her own, made her hesitate. It would not be too forward, she finally replied. Though I can't promise I'll be good company. Relief and pleasure brightened his face. I'll take my chances. At the livery, he helped her into her wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent warmth spreading through her, unfamiliar and alarming. Thank you for the meal, Yancy said, stepping back, and for taking a chance on a stranger. You're not quite a stranger anymore, Mr. Evans. The admission slipped out before she could reconsider. His smile deepened. Yancy, please. Yancy, she repeated, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. Good night. Good night, Olivia. Safe journey home. She drove away, feeling his eyes on her back, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. The logical part of her screamed warnings he was a bounty hunter. She was hiding secrets that could destroy her life. The part of her starved for human connection, for understanding, whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, he might be different from those she'd fled. As Truth or Consequences faded behind her, Olivia gazed at the stars emerging overhead and wondered if she'd just made the greatest mistake of her life, or taken the first step towards something she'd thought forever beyond her reach. 3 days passed without word from Yancy. Olivia told herself she was relieved, that the strange connection she'd felt during their meal had been nothing more than loneliness clouding her judgment. She threw herself into her work tending the garden, caring for Daisy and her calf, repairing a leaking roof. Physical exhaustion kept her from dwelling on blue eyes and a gentle smile. On the 4th day, she was hoeing weeds when the sound of approaching hooves made her straighten, hand instinctively reaching for the knife at her belt. Relief and something warmer flooded her when she recognized Yancy's chestnut stallion, his rider's form unmistakable even at a distance. She set down the hoe, smoothing her hair, though she knew it was a lost cause after hours of work in the sun. Dirt smudged her skirt and hands, Sweat dampened her blouse. Not exactly how she would have chosen to receive a visitor, but there was little to be done about it now. Yancy dismounted at the edge of her garden, removing his hat as he approached. He looked tired, dust coating his clothes, a day's stubble on his jaw. "Hope I'm not intruding," he called. "Not at all," Olivia replied, trying to keep her voice casual. "You've come a long way from town. Needed to clear my head, found myself headed in this direction." He stopped at the garden's edge, respecting the boundary of her domain. "Your vegetables are thriving." "The rain helped," she said, then gestured toward the house. "Would you like some water? You look like you've had a long ride." Gratitude crossed his face. "That would be appreciated." At the well, Olivia drew up a bucket of cool water. Yancy drank deeply, then splashed some on his face, washing away the worst of the trail dust. Water droplets clung to his eyelashes and the curve of his jaw, catching the afternoon sunlight. "Any luck with your search?" Olivia asked, keeping her tone neutral. Frustration tightened his expression. "None. Either Blackwell's not in truth or consequences, or he's hidden himself well." He sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "Beginning to think I followed a false lead." Relief and guilt warred in Olivia's chest. Perhaps he was never here. Perhaps. Yancy's gaze sharpened, studying her face. "Though it's strange, every instinct I have tells me I'm close. I've learned to trust those instincts." Olivia turned away, busying herself with the well rope. "Instincts can be misleading. Not mine. Not usually." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and horses and the lingering scent of tobacco. "Olivia, is there something you're not telling me?" The directness of his question made her pulse jump. She faced him, lifting her chin slightly. "Why would I know anything about your fugitive?" "I don't know," Yancy admitted, his voice soft. "But you tense every time I mention Blackwell. Your eyes get a look I've seen before in people keeping secrets." "Everyone has secrets, Mr. Evans." "Yancy," he corrected gently. "And yes, they do. But most secrets don't cause fear when a bounty hunter comes calling." Olivia felt cornered, though he hadn't moved closer. She could see the intelligence behind his eyes, the pieces aligning in his mind. In that moment, she knew her carefully constructed life balanced on a knife's edge. "I think you should go," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Hurt flashed across his face, quickly masked. "If that's what you want." "It is." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right. But Olivia," he hesitated. "Whatever you're afraid of, whatever you're running from, there are people who would help you face it, people who'd stand with you." The sincerity in his voice nearly broke her resolve. For a wild moment, she imagined telling him everything, the truth behind her carefully constructed identity, the events that had sent her fleeing across the country, the fear that lived in her bones. The urge to unburden herself was so strong it frightened her. "Some burdens can't be shared," she said finally. "Some mistakes follow you forever." Yancy's expression softened. "I don't believe that. I've never met anyone beyond redemption, beyond help." He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "When you're ready to talk, I'll listen, without judgment." The gentle touch, the promise in his words, they cracked something in Olivia's carefully constructed defenses. Tears burned behind her eyes, and she stepped back quickly before they could fall. "Goodbye, Yancy." He held her gaze a moment longer, then settled his hat on his head with a nod. "Not goodbye, just until next time." She watched him mount and ride away, the sun beginning its descent behind him, painting the landscape in gold and shadows. Only when he was a distant speck did she allow the tears to come, hot and angry at herself, at the circumstances that had brought her to this moment. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She paced her small cabin, mind racing between options. Yancy was getting too close, asking too many questions. The safest course would be to pack what she could carry and disappear again, find another remote corner to rebuild. The thought exhausted her to the marrow of her bones. 5 years of running. 5 years of isolation. How much longer could she live this half-life? And now there was Yancy, with his steady gaze and gentle hands, his talk of justice and redemption. Yancy, who stirred feelings she'd thought buried forever. Dawn found her sitting on her porch, watching the sky lighten from black to purple to the clear blue of a desert morning. She had made her decision during those long, dark hours. It was time to stop running. Time to face what came, whatever the cost. If Yancy Evans was as good as his reputation suggested, he would find the truth eventually. Better he hear it from her than piece it together from rumor and conjecture. Better to face the consequences on her own terms than be dragged back east in chains. The thought sent a shudder through her, but she steeled herself against it. One way or another, this chapter of her life was ending. She would decide how the story continued. 3 days later, Olivia guided her wagon into truth or consequences, her heart hammering against her ribs. She dressed with care her best skirt and blouse, hair neatly braided and pinned. If this was to be her last day of freedom, she would face it with dignity. She left her wagon at the livery and walked to the marshal's office, ignoring the curious glances from townspeople unused to seeing her, except on market days. The marshal's office was a small adobe building beside the jail, its door standing open to catch the morning breeze. Marshal Jenkins looked up in surprise as she entered, removing his boots from his desk and standing. "Miss Newcomb, this is unexpected. Something I can help you with. I'm looking for Mr. Evans," Olivia said, her voice remarkably steady. "I was told I might find him here." "Left about an hour ago," Jenkins replied, studying her with undisguised curiosity. "Said he had a lead on Blackwell. Headed out to the old Miller place on the North Road." Disappointment and relief warred within her. "I see. Thank you, Marshal. Want me to give him a message when he returns?" Olivia shook her head. "No, I'll find him myself." The old Miller place stood abandoned 3 miles north of town, its buildings slowly surrendering to the elements since Jeremiah Miller had died of apoplexy 2 winters past. Olivia approached cautiously, tying her horse to a stunted juniper tree before continuing on foot. The main house's door hung askew, windows broken by weather or mischievous boys. The only sound was the whisper of wind through the empty doorway and the distant cry of a hawk. No horses stood in the yard or barn, no sign anyone had been here recently. "Yancy," Olivia called, her voice sounding small in the vast stillness. No answer came. She moved closer to the house, scanning the ground for tracks, finding none fresh enough to matter. The marshal had been mistaken, or Yancy had already come and gone. A flicker of movement from inside the house caught her eye, perhaps a curtain stirred by the breeze. She hesitated, instinct warning her away from the darkened interior. Then, drawing a deep breath, she stepped onto the porch. "Hello? Is anyone?" The blow came from behind, a crushing weight against her skull that sent her sprawling forward into darkness. Consciousness returned in fragments, the rough texture of floorboards against her cheek, the metallic taste of blood in her mouth, the dull throbbing at the base of her skull. Olivia kept her eyes closed, trying to gather her senses before revealing she was awake. Someone moved nearby, boots scuffing against the wooden floor. "I know you're conscious," a male voice said, unfamiliar with a nasal quality that grated on her nerves. "Your breathing changed. Open your eyes, Miss Newcomb. Or should I say Mrs. Blackwell?" The name hit her like a second blow. Slowly, Olivia opened her eyes, blinking against the shaft of sunlight cutting through the broken window. A man stood over her, thin, weasel-faced, with small eyes set too close together. She'd never seen him before. "Who are you?" she managed, her voice raspy. "Name's Whitman. I work with Evans sometimes." He smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Though he doesn't know I'm here right now." "Where is Yancy?" Olivia struggled to sit up, the room spinning sickeningly around her. "Off chasing shadows. I let slip that Blackwell might be hiding at the old copper mine." Whitman squatted beside her, his smile widening. "That leaves you and me to have a little chat about the reward money." Understanding dawned cold and clear. "You're not working with Yancy, you're competing with him." "Smart lady." "Evans is too soft, all that nonsense about bringing men in alive, giving them fair trials." Whitman spat on the floor. "Waste of time when the reward's the same either way." Fear crawled up Olivia's spine, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "You've made a mistake." "I'm not who you think I am." "Save it," Whitman snapped. "I've been watching you since Evans started sniffing around, did some digging. Olivia Newcomb doesn't exist before 5 years ago, but Rebecca Blackwell disappeared from Boston around the same time." He cocked his head. "Your husband killed 2 people during that bank robbery in Santa Fe. Where's he hiding? Rebecca." The name sent a chill through her. How long since anyone had called her that? How long since she'd allowed herself to even think of the woman she'd once been? "Richard's dead," she said flatly. "Has been for years." Doubt flickered across Whitman's face. "Then where's the money from the robbery?" "There is no money. Richard gambled it away before I even knew what he'd done." "Liar." Whitman seized her arm, fingers digging painfully into her flesh. $5,000 doesn't just disappear. Tell me where it is, or I'll drag you back to Boston in chains. Those men Richard killed. One was a judge's son. They'll hang you as an accomplice so fast your feet won't touch the ground." Terror clawed at Olivia's throat, but beneath it burned a deeper emotion: rage. Rage at Richard for the destruction he'd wrought. Rage at this man for threatening the life she'd built. Rage at herself for ever believing she could escape the past. "I'm not an accomplice," she said, her voice low and fierce. "I knew nothing about Richard's plans until it was too late. I ran because no one would believe the wife of Richard Blackwell could be innocent." Whitman's grip tightened. "Pretty story, save it for the judge." He yanked her to her feet, the sudden movement sending pain lancing through her skull. "We're going to wait here nice and quiet until dark. Then we're heading east. I know people who'll pay extra to get their hands on Richard Blackwell's wife, with or without the official bounty." The implication turned Olivia's blood to ice. She had no illusions about what awaited her if this man delivered her to his people. Death might be preferable. As Whitman dragged her toward a chair in the corner, desperation lent her strength. She twisted suddenly in his grip, bringing her knee up sharply. He howled, doubling over, his hold loosening just enough for her to wrench free. She ran for the door, ignoring the screaming pain in her head. Behind her, Whitman cursed, his footsteps pounding in pursuit. She burst onto the porch, squinting in the bright sunlight, lungs burning as she gasped for air. "Stop right there," Whitman bellowed, and the unmistakable click of a pistol being cocked froze her in her tracks. Slowly, Olivia turned. Whitman stood in the doorway, a revolver leveled at her chest, his face contorted with rage. "That was stupid," he snarled. "I need you alive, but that doesn't mean you need all your limbs intact." The sound of approaching hooves saved her from finding out if he meant the threat. Both their heads snapped toward the sound as a rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. "Evans," Whitman muttered, his expression darkening. "Inside. Now." He grabbed her arm again, dragging her back into the house's dim interior. Olivia's mind raced, hope and fear tangling in her chest. Yancy was coming, but would he be her savior or her captor once he learned the truth? Whitman positioned her against the wall beside the front window, the gun pressed to her ribs. "Not a sound," he whispered harshly, "or I'll shoot him the moment he steps through that door, then deal with you after." Hooves clattered in the yard, followed by the creak of saddle leather as the rider dismounted. Olivia held her breath, straining to hear over the pounding of her heart. "Olivia," Yancy's voice carried clearly through the broken windows. "Are you here? I saw your horse." Whitman jabbed the gun harder against her side in silent warning. Outside, Yancy's footsteps approached the porch, boards creaking beneath his weight. "Olivia," closer now, his voice tinged with concern. A terrible clarity descended on her in that moment. Whitman would kill Yancy without hesitation. The bounty hunter might be ruthless, but even he wouldn't shoot an unarmed man in cold blood if there was money to be made by keeping him alive. And Yancy, who believed in justice, in redemption, in helping, would walk through that door expecting nothing more dangerous than an empty house. The choice crystallized in an instant. "Yancy," Olivia shouted, driving her elbow back into Whitman's stomach with all her strength. "Gun." Whitman cursed, the weapon discharging with a deafening roar. Pain blazed along Olivia's side as the bullet grazed her ribs. She staggered, falling to her knees as Yancy burst through the door, his own revolver drawn. What happened next blurred into a confusion of sound and motion. Another gunshot, a cry of pain, the thud of a body hitting the floor. Then hands were on her shoulders, gentle but urgent. "Olivia, can you hear me? Where are you hurt?" She blinked, Yancy's worried face swimming into focus above her. Behind him, Whitman lay motionless, a spreading stain darkening the front of his shirt. "My side," she managed. "Just a graze, I think." Yancy lifted her blouse carefully, his touch clinical as he examined the wound. Relief softened his features. "You're right, bleeding but not deep." "Let me bind it." He tore a strip from his own shirt, wrapping it around her torso with practiced efficiency. His hands were steady, but she could see fury burning in his eyes. "Whitman," she whispered, "is he?" "Dead." Yancy's voice was flat. "He drew on me. I had no choice." He finished tying the bandage, then helped her to a sitting position, supporting her back against the wall. "What happened? Why was he holding you at gunpoint?" The moment of reckoning had arrived. Olivia met his gaze, drawing strength from the concern she saw there. "He knew who I am. My real name is Rebecca Blackwell." She watched the information land, saw recognition and confusion cross his face in rapid succession. "Blackwell, Richard Blackwell's wife. Yes. The man I've been hunting. Yes." Yancy rocked back on his heels, processing this revelation. "Where is he?" "Dead." Olivia repeated the words she'd spoken to Whitman. "Tuberculosis took him 3 years ago in a mining camp north of here. I buried him myself." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. Finally, Yancy spoke, his voice carefully neutral. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "There's still a reward for his capture." "And what would they do to his wife?" Olivia asked bitterly. "The woman who helped him escape justice." "I didn't know about the robbery, Yancy, I swear it. But who would believe that? Richard Blackwell's devoted wife claiming ignorance of his crimes." "I ran because I had no choice." "You could have gone to the authorities, explained. I tried." The memory still burned, even after 5 years. "I went to the Boston police the moment I realized what Richard had done. They locked me in a cell, said I was an accomplice. Richard broke me out that night, the last thing he ever did for me that wasn't completely selfish. We fled west, and when he fell ill, I kept running, built a new life, became someone else." Yancy was silent again, his expression unreadable. Olivia waited, heart pounding, for his judgment. Would he believe her? Or would he see only the bounty, the chance to bring in at least one Blackwell to face justice? "The money," he said finally. "From the robbery. Did Richard have it?" "He lost it gambling in Denver 2 months after we left Boston." Olivia laughed bitterly. $5,000 that cost two men their lives, gone in a single night of cards. That was when I realized the man I'd married was a stranger. I stayed with him only because I had nowhere else to go, no one who would believe in my innocence. Yancy stood abruptly, pacing the small room, his boots stirring dust on the floorboards. Olivia watched him, trying to read his thoughts in the set of his shoulders, the tightness of his jaw. Her future hung on what he decided in these next moments. Finally, he turned back to her. "Why come looking for me today? You must have known the risk." "I was tired," Olivia admitted, exhaustion seeping into her voice. "Tired of running, of looking over my shoulder, of being afraid. I thought if anyone would listen, truly listen to my story, it might be you." "Why me?" "Because you believe in justice, not just bounties. Because when you look at me, I feel like you see more than just a woman living alone on the edge of nowhere." She met his gaze directly. "Because when you touched my face that day at the well, I wanted to trust you more than I've wanted anything in a very long time." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Yancy's expression softened, something shifting in his eyes. He crouched beside her again, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in the blue of his irises. "You said Richard's dead?" "Yes." "Can you prove it?" Understanding dawned. "His grave. I can show you where he's buried." "It's 2 days' ride north, in a small cemetery outside a mining camp called Silver Creek. I carved his name on a wooden marker myself." Yancy nodded slowly. "And if I believe you, if I confirm Richard Blackwell is dead and the money's gone, what then? What do you want, Olivia?" "Or should I call you Rebecca, Olivia?" she said firmly. "Rebecca Blackwell died with her husband. Olivia Newcomb is who I've become, who I want to be." She hesitated, then added in a softer voice, "What I want is to stop running, to live without fear, to see if there might be something between us worth exploring." The last words cost her, vulnerability never coming easily after years of self-protection. But Yancy deserved honesty after all the lies, all the evasions. His expression remained serious, but something in his eyes kindled. "There are still questions to answer, still truths to verify." He reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face with the same gentleness he'd shown days before. "But I believe you, Olivia, and I want to help you prove your innocence." Relief weakened her limbs, tears burning behind her eyes. "Why? Why would you help me?" "Because in my line of work, I've learned to recognize guilt and innocence in people's eyes." His hand lingered at her cheek. "And because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for." The words dissolved the last of her defenses. Tears spilled down her cheeks, years of tension releasing in a flood she couldn't control. Yancy's arms came around her, solid and warm, pulling her gently against his chest. She felt his heartbeat beneath her ear, steady and strong. "My past will destroy you," she warned, voice muffled against his shirt. His hand stroked her hair, a soothing rhythm. "Then we'll face it together." The promise wrapped around her heart, a tender lifeline in the storm she'd weathered alone for too long. Olivia closed her eyes, allowing herself to believe, just for this moment, that redemption might be possible after all. The journey to Silver Creek took longer than expected. Olivia's wound, though not serious, slowed their progress, and summer storms turned trails to mud, forcing detours through unfamiliar terrain. Yancy remained vigilant, concerned that Whitman might have had partners who would come looking when he failed to return. They traveled as husband and wife, a practical deception that protected Olivia's reputation, while allowing Yancy to tend her injury without raising eyebrows. The pretense created an intimacy neither had anticipated, sharing meals and campfires, sleeping beneath the same canvas as rain drummed overhead. On the fourth night, camped in the shelter of a rock overhang. Yancy changed Olivia's bandage by firelight. His fingers moved with practiced care over her skin, the wound already healing cleanly. "Another day, maybe two," he said, securing the fresh cloth. "The fever's gone completely." Olivia nodded, hyper-aware of his proximity, the gentle pressure of his hands. "Thank you for your care. I know this delay can't be easy for you." Yancy met her gaze, firelight reflecting in his eyes. "I'm not in a hurry, Olivia." Something in his tone made her breath catch. "No, no." His hand lingered at her waist, warm through the thin fabric of her camisole. "I find I'm enjoying the journey." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Olivia found herself leaning closer, drawn by the tenderness in his expression, the steadiness of his presence that had become her anchor in the tumultuous days since Whitman's attack. "Yancy," she whispered, uncertain what she meant to say. He waited, patient, his thumb tracing small circles against her side, not demanding, simply connecting. When she didn't continue, he smiled slightly. "It's all right, Olivia. We have time." The promise in those words eased something in her chest. He wasn't pushing, wasn't expecting. Whatever grew between them would unfold at its own pace. They reached Silver Creek on the 6th day. The mining camp, much as Olivia remembered it, a collection of weathered buildings clustered in a narrow valley. The stamp mill silent now that the primary veins had played out. Most miners had moved on to more promising claims, leaving behind only the stubborn and the hopeless. The cemetery stood on a gentle slope above the town, wooden markers in uneven rows beneath a stand of ponderosa pines. Olivia led Yancy to the farthest corner where a simple cross bore the roughly carved inscription, "Richard Blackwell, 1841–1875. "Here," she said quietly. "This is where I buried him." Yancy knelt beside the grave, studying the marker. "You stayed with him until the end." "He was my husband," Olivia replied simply. "Whatever his faults, whatever pain he caused, I couldn't leave him to die alone." Yancy nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The local preacher would have records of the burial." "Yes, Reverend Simmons. He helped me dig the grave. Richard was not well liked here. Few would assist a stranger's widow." They found Simmons in the small church at the edge of town, a gaunt man with kind eyes who remembered Olivia immediately. "Mrs. Blackwell," he greeted her, surprise evident in his voice. "I didn't expect to see you again after you left so suddenly." "Circumstances have changed, Reverend," Olivia explained. "This is Yancy Evans, my—" She hesitated, unsure how to introduce him. "Friend," Yancy supplied, extending his hand. "I'm helping Mrs. Blackwell resolve some matters related to her husband's death." Understanding dawned in Simmons' expression. "The troubles back east, I wondered if they might follow you here eventually." He gestured to a pair of chairs. "Please sit. How can I help?" Yancy explained their purpose, his manner respectful but direct. "I need confirmation that Richard Blackwell died when and where Mrs. Blackwell claims. There are interested parties who would benefit from verification." Simmons nodded, rising to retrieve a leather-bound ledger from a shelf. "I keep records of all burials, sparse as they may be." He flipped through pages, then turned the book toward them. "Here. Richard Blackwell, interred May 18, 1875. Cause of death, consumption. Witnessed by myself and Doc Hollister, who attended him in his final days." Yancy studied the entry, then looked up. "Is the doctor still in town?" "No, moved on to Denver last winter." Simmons' gaze moved between them, assessing. "But I can attest to the man's death with absolute certainty, Mr. Evans. I helped prepare the body myself." Relief coursed through Olivia. Confirmation from a man of the cloth carried weight, perhaps enough to satisfy the authorities that Richard Blackwell would never stand trial for his crimes. "There's one more thing," Yancy said. "The money from the robbery, $5,000. Simmons' expression turned grave. "If you're hoping it's buried with him, I can assure you it's not. Richard Blackwell died penniless. His widow had to sell her wedding ring to pay for his coffin." He glanced at Olivia with sympathy. "Many men came through here seeking fortune and finding only misery. Whatever Blackwell had when he arrived, it was gone long before his death." Outside the church, Olivia drew a deep breath of pine-scented air. "Do you believe me now?" Yancy nodded slowly. "I do. Richard Blackwell is dead and the money's gone." He turned to face her fully. "But that still leaves you, Olivia. You've been living under a false identity, running from a past you didn't create." "What choice did I have?" she asked, the old defensiveness rising. "I understand why you ran," Yancy assured her. "But now we have proof of Richard's death. We could go to the authorities, explain what happened. Clear your name." The possibility hung before her like a mirage, tantalizing but potentially dangerous. "And if they don't believe me, if they decide Richard's wife must have been complicit, then we'll fight it," Yancy said firmly. "Together, as I promised." The conviction in his voice stirred hope in Olivia's chest, a dangerous, fragile thing she'd not permitted herself in years. "Why would you do this for me? Risk your reputation, your livelihood?" Yancy stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Because in these past days, I've come to care for you more than I thought possible. Because I see your strength, your resilience, your kindness despite everything you've endured." His eyes held hers, unwavering. "Because when I think of returning to my solitary life, the thought no longer brings peace, only emptiness." Emotion swelled in Olivia's throat, too large for words. She squeezed his hands instead, hoping he could read in her eyes what she couldn't yet express aloud, that he had become essential to her, a foundation where before had been only shifting sand. "We'll start with the marshal in Truth or Consequences," Yancy continued. "Jenkins is a fair man. With Reverend Simmons' testimony and the burial record, he can help us contact the authorities in Boston, explain the situation." Olivia nodded, fear and hope warring within her. "And if it works, if they accept that I was innocent, that Richard acted alone, then you're free," Yancy said simply. "Free to be Olivia Newcomb or Rebecca Blackwell or whoever you choose to become next." His expression softened. "Though I admit I've grown rather fond of Olivia." The teasing note in his voice drew a smile to her lips. "As have I." They departed Silver Creek the following morning, carrying a signed letter from Reverend Simmons attesting to Richard Blackwell's death and burial. The return journey felt different, lighter somehow, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. They talked more freely, sharing stories from their lives before their paths had crossed. Olivia learned of Yancy's childhood in Texas, his service as a Union scout during the war despite his Southern roots, the loss of his family that had set him adrift. He listened as she described her sheltered upbringing in Boston, her whirlwind courtship with the charming Richard, the gradual realization that her husband's smooth exterior hid dangerous flaws. On the third night of their journey, camped beside a small stream, Yancy pulled something from his saddlebag, a bottle of whiskey he'd purchased in Silver Creek. "Thought we might celebrate," he explained, pouring small measures into tin cups. Olivia accepted hers with raised eyebrows. "What are we celebrating? The truth." He raised his cup. "And new beginnings." They drank beneath a canopy of stars, the whiskey burning pleasantly down Olivia's throat. The night was warm, crickets singing in the grass around them, the stream's gentle murmur a soothing backdrop. When Yancy moved to sit beside her on the fallen log she'd claimed as a seat, his thigh pressing against hers, she didn't pull away. "What will you do?" she asked softly. "After we've settled my situation one way or another." Yancy gazed into the fire, considering. I've been thinking about that. Bounty hunting. It served its purpose, gave me direction when I needed it, but I'm not sure it's what I want for the rest of my days. What do you want? He turned to look at her, firelight gilding his features. Land, perhaps. A place to build something lasting, cattle, maybe horses. He hesitated, then added quietly, someone to share it with. The implication wasn't lost on Olivia. Her heart quickened, hope unfurling within her chest like a desert flower after rain. That sounds peaceful. It does. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. What about you? If your name is cleared, what then? I don't know, she admitted. I've been surviving for so long, I haven't allowed myself to think beyond the next season. She stared into the flames, possibilities suddenly opening before her like doors in a long hallway. I like my land. It's become home in a way nowhere else has been, but I wouldn't mind. Company. Yancy's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the simple touch sending warmth through her veins that had nothing to do with whiskey or campfire. Olivia, he said softly. She turned to him, aware of his closeness, the faint scent of tobacco and leather that had become familiar, comforting. Yes, may I kiss you? The question, so respectful, so unlike the presumption she'd grown accustomed to from men, made her smile. Yes, she whispered. You may. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. His hand rose to cup her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. When his lips finally met hers, the contact was light, questioning a beginning rather than a demand. Olivia responded with the caution of someone long unused to tenderness, her free hand coming to rest against his chest, where she could feel the steady beating of his heart. The kiss deepened gradually, transforming from exploration to affirmation, a promise passing between them without words. When they finally drew apart, Yancy rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her lips. I'm falling in love with you, he confessed, the words simple and unadorned. I know it's fast, maybe foolish given everything that's uncertain, but I want you to know. Tears pricked behind Olivia's eyelids, emotion overwhelming her. Not foolish, she managed. Brave. She leaned back slightly, needing to see his face. I've been afraid for so long, Yancy. Afraid to hope, to connect, to feel. You make me brave enough to try again. He smiled, the expression transforming his features. That's enough for now, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The rest will come in its own time. They returned to truth or consequences a week after they'd departed, the town unchanged yet somehow different to Olivia's eyes. What had once represented danger, a place where her past might catch up to her, now held the possibility of resolution, of a future beyond hiding. Marshal Jenkins received them in his office, his expression neutral as Yancy explained the situation, presented Reverend Simmons' letter, and laid out their proposal for contacting the Boston authorities to clear Olivia's name. Quite a tale, Miss Newcomb, or Mrs. Blackwell, I should say, Jenkins observed when Yancy finished. You understand I'll need to verify this independently. Of course, Olivia replied, hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. We expect nothing less. Jenkins studied her for a long moment. For what it's worth, I never believed you were involved in anything unsavory. Too hardworking, too private for someone with a guilty conscience. He turned to Yancy. Whitman's body was claimed by a cousin from El Paso. Man seemed more interested in his belongings than proper burial arrangements. Did he ask questions about what happened? Yancy inquired. Some. Told him Whitman drew on you, you defended yourself. End of story. Jenkins shrugged. He didn't press. Got the feeling they weren't close. Relief eased some of the tension in Olivia's shoulders. One potential threat, at least, appeared neutralized. I'll send telegrams to Boston today. Jenkins continued. Meanwhile, Mrs. Blackwell, I suggest you return to your homestead and continue as normal. No sense attracting attention until we know which way this will fall. The waiting proved more difficult than Olivia had anticipated. Days stretched into weeks as messages traveled between Truth or Consequences and Boston, each reply generating more questions, more requests for information. Yancy stayed in town, visiting Olivia's homestead frequently to bring news and supplies. Their relationship deepened during these visits, conversations by lamplight, shared meals, moments of tenderness that grew more confident with each passing day. They spoke of the future in careful terms, neither wanting to tempt fate while Olivia's situation remained unresolved. A month after their return, Jenkins summoned them both to his office. His expression gave nothing away as they seated themselves across from his desk. "Heard back from Boston," he announced without preamble. "Got the final telegram this morning." He picked up a paper, scanning it briefly before continuing. "The district attorney there has reviewed the evidence we provided, along with the testimony from Reverend Simmons and Dr. Hollister, who they located in Denver." Olivia held her breath, fingers digging into the arms of her chair. "They've determined that Richard Blackwell is indeed deceased, and the money from the robbery was never recovered." Jenkins looked up, meeting Olivia's gaze directly. "Furthermore, they found no evidence that Rebecca Blackwell participated in or had prior knowledge of her husband's crimes. All charges against her have been dropped." The words hung in the air, almost too momentous to absorb. Olivia stared at the marshal, waiting for the condition, the catch that would snatch away this miracle. "You're free, Mrs. Blackwell," Jenkins said, his tone softening. "Free to live as Rebecca Blackwell or Olivia Newcomb or whatever name you choose. No one's looking for you anymore." A sob escaped her throat, years of tension releasing in a rush that left her trembling. Yancy's hand found hers, squeezing gently in silent support. "There's one more thing," Jenkins continued, a hint of amusement entering his voice. "The reward for Richard Blackwell was $5,000, dead or alive. With confirmation of his death, that bounty has been paid out." He slid a bank draft across the desk. "To you, Mrs. Blackwell, as his legal widow. The Boston authorities felt it was appropriate compensation for your troubles." Olivia stared at the paper, unable to comprehend the irony. The exact amount Richard had stolen and lost, now returned to her through the system of justice that had once condemned her. "I don't want it," she said automatically. Jenkins shrugged. "That's your choice. But if I may suggest, the money was stolen from a bank that was fully insured. No individual lost their savings. Think of it as restitution for 5 years of living in fear." Yancy's hand tightened on hers. "Take some time to consider, Olivia. There's no rush to decide." Outside the marshal's office, the afternoon sun bathed Truth or Consequences in golden light. Olivia stood on the boardwalk, feeling strangely weightless, as if she might float away without Yancy's steadying presence beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've been Rebecca hiding as Olivia for so long. I'm not sure who I am now that I can be either, or neither." Yancy guided her to a bench in the shade of the general store's awning. "You're the same woman you were this morning, strong, determined, kind." He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "The only difference is now you can choose your future without looking over your shoulder." "Our future," Olivia corrected, the word still new and fragile on her tongue. His smile deepened, eyes crinkling at the corners. "If that's what you want." "It is." She turned to face him fully. "Yancy, I want to build something lasting. With you. Whether it's on my homestead or somewhere new, whether I'm Olivia or Rebecca or some combination of both, I know I want you beside me." He took her hands in his expression solemn. "I've spent years chasing people who didn't want to be found. Never thought I'd find something worth staying for." His thumbs traced circles on her wrists. "I love you, Olivia Newcomb, or Rebecca Blackwell, or whoever you decide to be tomorrow." "Just yours," she whispered. "That's enough for now." Yancy leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. "It's more than enough. It's everything." 6 months later, as winter settled over New Mexico territory, Olivia stood in the doorway of the expanded cabin, watching snowflakes drift from a pearl-gray sky. Behind her, Yancy moved about the kitchen, the domestic sounds of coffee brewing and breakfast cooking a counterpoint to the profound silence of the snow-covered landscape. So much had changed since that day in the marshal's office. They'd married in a simple ceremony in truth or consequences, Reverend Simmons making the journey from Silver Creek to officiate. The reward money, which Olivia had eventually accepted, had gone toward expanding her homestead, a larger cabin, a proper barn, breeding stock that would form the foundation of the horse ranch Yancy had dreamed of establishing. She had chosen to remain Olivia Newcomb Evans, finding that identity fit her better than the ghost of Rebecca Blackwell. The past hadn't disappeared. Nightmares still came occasionally, moments of irrational fear when a stranger rode too close to their property. But with each passing month, those shadows receded further. Warm arms encircled her from behind, Yancy's chin coming to rest on her shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured. Olivia leaned back against his chest, savoring his solidity, his warmth. "I was thinking about how far we've come. How different everything is from a year ago. Regrets?" His voice held no insecurity, just simple curiosity. She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, the face that had become her home, her center. "Not one," she assured him. "My past didn't destroy you after all." Yancy smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes in the way she'd grown to love. "No," he agreed, pulling her closer. "It brought us together." As their lips met in a kiss full of promise, snow continued to fall beyond the doorway, erasing tracks, covering the hard edges of the landscape, transforming the world into something new and full of possibility, just as love had done for them.